Hi guys, welcome back. So in our previous classes, we spoke about aggregate demand curve and what shapes the aggregate demand curve. That was when we were talking about the expansionary fiscal policy and expansionary monetary policy. Same thing goes for contractionary fiscal and contractionary monetary policies. They all change, they all shift the aggregate demand curve. But in this video, we'll be talking about the aggregate supply curve. Okay, and of course, there will be an assignment at the end of the video as usual. So supply basically is talking about the amount of goods and services that producers are willing to supply at a given price and at a particular time. So that is supply primarily. But when we're talking about the aggregate supply are looking at the total output supplied in an economy at a period of time and at a given price level. So if you look at it from your understanding of microeconomics, you'd realize that only perfect markets actually have supply curves, okay, which is the area of their average variable cost, area of their marginal cost rather, as is greater than their minimum average variable cost. Okay, if you look at, and obviously perfect market doesn't exist anywhere because to a reasonable extent firms set their own prices, okay, to a reasonable extent. Now if you look at imperfect market structures, monopoly, oligopoly, monopolistic competition, which is more common, okay, you realize that firms do not essentially have a supply curve, okay, because what the price they charge is based on their AR curve, their average revenue curve, and then the output that is being produced at whatever price they want to charge is obtained through the intersection of the marginal cost and the marginal revenue curve. That is where the MR equals to MC. Where the MR equals to MC, obviously. So that tells us that why I'm telling us this is that the price that firms set is the firms that price set for their goods is to a large extent is firms. Sorry, what I intended to say was that firms set their prices, okay. And then the other thing that I want us to really note from the story that I've been saying since is that firms don't essentially have what we can call supply curves, okay. And so except perfect firms in the perfectly competitive market, which obviously don't exist because their assumptions are just crazy, okay. The assumptions of the perfect market are crazy, and that is why I'm telling you that I'm trying to like bring it back to aggregate supply, the aggregate supply, so which is something that you can't really get from adding up the aggregate supply curves of respective firms in a given economy. So that's not how it works. Anyway, what is the aggregate supply curve? The aggregate supply curve is simply a graphical explanation, a graphical depiction of the aggregate output supplied in an economy at their respective price level, or let me say at their respective average price level. Now, in order to derive the aggregate supply curve, we need to make important assumptions. Okay, and the assumptions are on the board already. So, number one, labor costs are significantly high. Labor costs are significantly high. That's number one. The number two, labor costs are greater. They are significantly greater than other input costs. Okay, that's also important. And the third one is that wages are sticky, which is talking about labor cost as well. We are assuming that labor costs are sticky. Now, why do we need to make these assumptions? We want to look at the relationship between price level and aggregate output supply. When there is an increase in price level, what it means, as I explained when we were trying to derive the aggregate demand curve, is that the prices of input and output are rising. That is what it means. So it's not as if it is leaving a good or a service out. Everything is rising. And then if you recall that I was trying to say then that the output of a firm might be an intermediate good in the production process of another firm. Okay, so which means that as output prices are rising, we have input prices rising to some extent. It's not everything that firms produce that are actually final goods and services that the consumers consume straight up. So there are some, or there are a significant, if not a large part of firms' output that happen to be raw materials for other firms. So as output prices are rising, input prices are rising. Now for laborers as well, as output prices and input prices are rising, of course, labor is an input. In fact, a very important factor of production. So that also means that wages are rising. Now, if you look at it, if there is an increase in price level, okay, which increases output costs, increases output prices, okay, and is expected to raise profits of firms provided that other input prices don't increase. But then we are having an increase in output prices, one. We're having an increase in input prices, including increase in labor costs. So what that simply means that an increase in price level will not have any effect on output, on aggregate output. Hope you understand what I mean. Okay, if output price rises by 5% and all input prices also rise by 5%, so what's the big deal? So it's just saying that how do I put it? The purchasing power is the same thing. Okay, and so it's not as if there's one demand somewhere. It's not as if I think you get what I mean. Okay, so it's not as if there's going to be an increase in the demand for output or something like that. No. Okay, so now that is why it is important to assume that to make these three important assumptions. So here we are assuming that labor costs are far greater than other input costs. Okay, and then we're also assuming that labor costs are are sticky, which is actually empirically true. Okay, when prices are rising, on average, I'm talking about when the average price level is rising on average, wage doesn't respond to it as quickly as price actually rising. Now, I don't know if you've had an industrial action in your country before, if you've witnessed one where laborers in the union just goes on strike or something, and while complaining that their wages or their salaries are no longer are already too small. So what they then table in such matters or during such periods is when they are making their negotiation with the government or the employers concerned, they then look at what has been happening in the economy and then table that as an argument that the average price level has been rising over time, okay, and that has lowered their purchasing power. Okay, that is their wages, their salaries now have to rise in order to compensate for the increase in price level. And if you look at it, this usually take years. Let's say a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. Okay, for you to now have a renegotiation of all of these contracts and how salaries are going to be improved. And we are talking about price level that rose, average price level that rose, let's say about 5 years ago, 2 years ago, a year ago, and then wages just liberals just clamoring for an increase in wages now. Okay, which means that to a reasonable extent, wages are sticky, that is, they don't quickly respond to an increase in the price level. But that doesn't mean they don't respond at all. So now, how important is that in deriving the AS curve? We've also assumed that the aggregates labor costs are higher than input costs. So when there is an increase in the average price level, okay, and output prices increase as well as the price of other inputs. Okay, so now labor represents the highest input cost, and now we are assuming that it is not rising. So if labor cost is not rising, so that means that if output price is rising by, let's say, 5%, okay, is it even 5%? Okay, let me say 5% generally throughout the entire economy. Input prices are not rising as much. Okay, simply because labor that represents a significant chunk of total costs is sticky, and that gives firms an avenue to make profit, because it simply means additional revenue is going to be greater than additional costs. Okay, and so an increase in price level when wages are sticky simply encourages firms to produce more, because that means there is an opportunity to make profit. Okay, so and with that we can easily explain that an increase in price level will lead to an increase in output. Now, so that's settled. So an increase in price level will lead to an increase in output. So we assume that. So that makes us know that when price level goes up, output increases. Price level increases, output increases, as long as wages are sticky or not responding as fast. That gives us a positive.
Please like and subscribe.